So thank you. All right, I am very excited to introduce Dr. Jasmine McDonald, who is going to be one of our keynote speakers. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. She received her doctorate in 2019 from the Biological Sciences in the Public Health program at Harvard University with a concentration in immunology and infectious disease. So, not a lot of study going on there. Okay, I can tell, right? She did postdoctoral training in breast cancer epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University, and this is where I first met her while she was doing that. And I had the opportunity to see some of her preliminary work as she was working on what she's going to present today, and it was really exciting. So this is why I was like, Jasmine should come and do this, right, for us. Her research portfolio integrates individual level factors like health behaviors, the microenvironment, physical, social, microbial environment, and biology, endocrine disruption, tumor microenvironment to inform breast cancer etiology across and within critical windows of breast development, including the prenatal, puberty, sorry, that's a hard word for me, I don't know why, pregnancy and postpartum windows. And while relevant to all women, Dr. McDonald's portfolio is nested within populations that have a higher burden of cancer, including those with a genetic predisposition, racial and ethnic minorities, and young women. As an avid teacher and mentor, Dr. McDonald was awarded the 2021 Columbia University Teaching Award, yay, for her dedication and excellence in teaching, mentoring, and community engagement. She teaches cancer epidemiology at the Mailman Center, is the Associate Director of the Cancer Research Training and Education Center at the Herbert Irving Comprehensive Cancer Center, and the co-director of YES in the Heights program at the HICCC. The YES program aims to engage students from overlooked and underserved backgrounds, New York public high school teachers, and the community in discussions about cancer health equity. Anyway, we were talking a little bit about that last night on the way drive in from the airport. And I must tell you that I think that Jasmine is a fantastic researcher and she's an amazing colleague. So I'm really glad she's here with us today. And I'm going to turn time over to Dr. McDonald.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to first start off by saying thank you very much, Dr. Frost, for actually being there in my journey as a postdoc, as I was trying to figure out how do you do epidemiology when you're used to working with snails and mice. So thank you very much. And also thank you for Leanne for being so great at organizing and getting me here. So I'm going to make sure that we all can see the screen in its full glory. All right. So today we're going to talk about the inequitable cost of beauty. I want to kind of situate this in the context of what my expertise is in. But before we get into that, I do want to state I'm going to be talking about an advocacy group that I work with, Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, that's based in California, where I'm a board member. And I do have a legal consulting firm called Dr. Mama Boss. So what to expect? We are going to ground in the outcome that I mainly study, which is breast cancer. I'm focusing on breast cancer in young women. I study breast cancer etiology, across the cancer continuum and a life course perspective. So I want to also give everyone a kind of grounding in what that means. Then we're going to delve into one of the highlights of my portfolio and looking at how your personal decision in personal care products is actually associated with population level risk, and then give you some uplifting advice on what to do next. Never leave an audience sad. So breast cancer is 3,000 to 2,500 BC discovered, a very old disease that was not very prevalent because you have to live old enough to actually develop cancer. But now it's not only a national problem, it's a global problem. And in the United States, 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer in their lifetime. I'm really concerned about the trends that we're seeing in the development of breast cancer for young women. So this is showing the SEER registry data and focusing on age intervals of 15 years from 1976 to 2009. And what the gray bar box is really highlighting is that there has been an annual percent change increase in the incidence of invasive breast cancer in women that are under the age of 40. It's about a 2% annual percent change. That means from 1976 to 2009, every year, there's a 2% increase in women being diagnosed with invasive breast cancer. But this percentage isn't, this is population level, and we know that there is inequity in how we see cancer incidence as well as other cancer outcomes, and breast cancer is no stranger. So here we're looking at the SEER9 data set. It's just showing you in this chart pretty much the reflection of how as you get younger, they're seeing this increased trend. But what I want to focus on is that just 1992 to 2009, this rise has primarily been seen in Black and non-Hispanic white women, with Black women having an annual percent change of 3.5% every year. So this is a serious problem, and many people would attribute it to triple negative breast cancer, because we know that Black women have a higher prevalence of triple negative breast cancer, which is being ER negative, PR negative, and HER2 negative. It's hard to treat and has worse outcomes. But really, these trends are specific by breast cancer subtypes, and it's not by triple negative breast cancer. So if you follow the kind of highlights we have here, we see that's actually the hormone receptor positive subtypes that have been increasing for many racial and ethnic groups, as well as across age groups. Specifically, luminal B, we see that for non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Asian Pacific Islander, as well as Hispanic, we're seeing this increased percentage change between 2010 to 2016. We see it for ages 25 to 39, 40 to 54, 55 to 69, and even 70 to 84. So something's going on within this time frame where we're seeing an increase in hormone receptor positive breast cancer subtypes. We also see that among those who are under 40, there's an enrichment in HER2 new incidence. This is mainly prevalent in non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic Asian Pacific Islanders and Hispanic. And then in actuality, triple negative breast cancer has been going down in incidence, specifically across non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic Black. So what is going on? I mean, it's not that you get to the age of 25 and then all of a sudden cancer is initiated. Cancer takes a very long time, it has a very long latency period. So studying cancer at the time that someone has cancer is not necessarily really capturing what caused the cancer. And so what I like to do is understand breast cancer epidemiology from a life course perspective. So I apply this framework because it accounts for the lived experiences that may impact cancer incidence and mortality. It's really important to know when people say, oh, it's genetics. There is no genetic gene or polymorphism or epigenetic mutation or SNP that is deterministic for developing cancer. So what the life course epidemiology does is it allows you to understand the physical or social exposures that are experienced across the life course during critical periods of development, like in utero, puberty, pregnancy, and study how those long-term effects impact breast cancer risk. Now, these models have been developed such that there's the accumulation of risk model, and that's pretty much suggesting that there's an accumulation of gradual assaults. And these episodes of illness and injury or just exposure to adverse environmental conditions or health damaging behaviors leads to your outcome. But there's also the idea of the chains of risk model. This is a sequence of linked events. And it's really thinking about bad luck follows bad luck follows bad luck. That because one bad experience happens, it tends to lead to another, to another, to another. So as you heard, like I am actually trained as a basic lab scientist in immunology and infectious diseases. And I know that the interconnectedness between the hormonal and the immune system is something that I've been very interested in. And Life Course Epi allows me to understand the biological, but also the behavioral and psychosocial processes that operate over time and across generations to influence the development of breast cancer. So when I'm thinking about breast cancer, I think of it along the lines of critical windows. What windows of time would the breast tissue be highly vulnerable to exogenous exposures? These are environmental influences during the time period where the breast may be highly proliferative, highly changing. And so we look at the prenatal period, the pubertal period, the pregnancy and the postpartum period, which I'll focus on today, and the transition from postmenopausal to premenopausal to postmenopausal. Now, many people will say, like, okay, well, you can have this critical window theory, but how do you prove that exposures during these critical periods are in fact related to increased risk of breast cancer? So before I go into my studies that look at personal care product exposure, I want to prove to you that there is a foundation in understanding these critical windows and telling you about the DDT toxic legacy. It was fun times. I mean, you had fog trucks that help you take those like mystical pictures, and you can be swimming in a haze. And of course, who can catch up fastest to the fog truck is also a very good competition for boys. So it was like a fun times. However, pesticides are very harmful, and we know that it was banned in 1970s because of its prenatal effects. And they've also seen that prenatal exposure, so being exposed while in the womb, is associated with increased breast cancer risk. And I study mammographic breast density because if you are thinking about studying breast cancer incidence, you have to have a large enough population, a large enough period of time to observe the outcome. So I also look at mammographic breast density, which is an intermediate marker, and high mammographic breast density is associated with increased breast cancer risk. So it's a way to kind of shrink down your observation time. And what we have found that prenatal DDT exposure is also associated with denser breast tissue. We also were looking at the idea in a high-risk cohort of women who were diagnosed with, whose mothers were diagnosed with breast cancer. And so we found that for women who had a breast cancer family history because their mother was diagnosed, being exposed prenatally actually increased their risk of having denser breast tissue than those that did not have a breast cancer family history. So we know in general that this is an exposure for all women, especially women who are at increased risk. But what about the timing of exposure? And so a study was done by Terry and colleagues that looked at the birth cohort and the period of time that an individual was actually exposed. And so we know that the active DDT use was from 1945 to 1970. And we know that women who were born between 1920 and 1931, they have ages 14 to 25 years old. And so what they found is those women who were exposed in late adolescence or mid-adolescence to adulthood had a twofold increased risk of developing breast cancer between the ages of 50 to 54. But what was really important is that those from in utero exposure to ages 13, and we're talking about pre-menses, menarcheal ages, they were exposed such that they had a nearly 5.5-fold increase in developing breast cancer before the age of 50. And so that's just showing you that being exposed at critical time periods can really impact your later age at developing an outcome. So what I examine is really the lived life and these exogenous exposures. And this is the lived life of all women. I think that what's important to note is that these life stages, as I've shown you, are important to when you're exposed. We often forget, though, that living and surviving with breast cancer is very common. And we have a lot of survivors in our nation, and they are at increased risk for recurrence or new cancer. And so also thinking about the exogenous exposures that these women carry. We also know in general that while it's assumed that low doses, the whole dogma is really that if you see a dose response, then you know that it is associated with the outcome. But in fact, that's not necessarily the case when it comes to environmental exposures that are endocrine disruptor chemicals. We know that these chemicals are actually associated with low doses having even a more harmful effect than even what we see for high dosage. The other thing that we note is that cumulative exposure. So in general, when we think about our exposures to, let's say, one personal care product like face lotion, well, the fact of the matter is that's just one exposure. And if we're thinking about, oh, okay, I'm exposed to phthalate from that one face lotion. The fact of the matter is that you will find phthalates based off of the food packaging that you are using, like whatever food you're eating. You'll find it in your household products. You'll find it in the furniture you sit on. You'll find it in the products you put on your face, the products you put on your hair, the products that you are serving dishes on. There's a lot of exposure to that one chemical, albeit we are thinking about the exposure of hair care products or lotion. We also know that there's mixtures. You're not just exposed to one endocrine disruptor chemical. These are chemicals that are exogenous factors that can impede on your natural hormonal processes. But we know that mixtures, this is very new in the field with how do you examine the mixture analysis of how certain chemicals act together to affect a disease. And that's very complicated, right? Because you have to realize that all of these exposures are coming from an exposomics type of standpoint, where you're not just exposed to phthalates and parabens, but you're exposed to all sorts of different toxins that I'll show you. Now, I do center this on the study of Black women for various reasons. Grounded in breast cancer, we know that Black women have a 31% breast cancer mortality rate, higher than all racial ethnic groups. We know that Black women are diagnosed at younger ages. They have an elevated risk of triple negative breast cancer. And we even know that when we look at the risk of estrogen receptor negative breast cancer, it's a more aggressive breast cancer subtype, they have a 41% higher likelihood of being diagnosed with estrogen receptor negative breast cancer when they're living in a Jim Crow state. And this is in comparison to white women who are living in a Jim Crow state. So the lived experiences of a Black woman, from institutionalized to racialized situations across the life course, will really impact what we're seeing in breast cancer. But what I really wanted to look at specifically is those exposures that are environmental in nature and kind of not universal, but can be quantified. And that is our personal care routines. These are personal choices. Everyone has a personal care routine. I don't care if it's just soap and water. Everyone wakes up and does something to get ready for the day. And when you're doing that, you're introducing maybe a number of toxic chemicals. This includes phthalates and dioxins and phenols and parabens and UV filters and heavy metals, et cetera. And while everyone uses shampoo, everyone uses soap, everyone uses some type of hair product, there are certain beauty products that are really isolated to women of color or women with more diverse hair textures. And so these beauty products that we think about, especially among Black women, is hair perms and relaxers. So these are things that straighten out the natural coils of the hair. We also think about hair dyes. Well, many women use hair dyes, but darker hair dyes actually contain higher amounts of toxins. And hot oil treatments, that's really something that is very common in the Black community. And these are all products that have been associated with hormonally driven health outcomes. So while I focus on the association of these beauty products, these chemicals as it relates to breast cancer outcomes, many of these beauty products that have these toxic chemicals have been associated with endometriosis, uterine fibroids, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, and allergic reactions, infertility, and preterm birth, and so much more. And while we always say that, well, I can't say that it's causative, the fact of the matter is that these products that we're talking about have these harmful chemicals, and we know there's a biological underpinning of how they're impacting the body. Endocrine disruptors interfere with hormone production, which can lead to hormone-related issues, but they're also carcinogenic compounds that can alter the DNA in our cells, leading to abnormal or uncontrolled increased growth of certain types of cells. So with that being said, why are they put in our products? I mean, they're not put in our products to harm us. They're actually put in the products to make the product more attractive. Synthetic estrogen is added to products to promote hair growth. But we also know that it leads to epigenetic changes that leads to predisposition for tumorigenesis, altered mammary gland development, and cell proliferation. Phthalates are added to carry the fragrance and also for your hair to have greater pliability and flexibility. But it also alters mammary gland development through epigenetic changes, promotes cell growth. And really importantly is that it increases migratory and invasive property of breast cancer cells. So let's say that you're in a postpartum period where you have this increased risk of developing breast cancer because every woman has that transient increased risk. And you're giving yourself these exposures to phthalates. And if there is a cell, an abnormal cell, it's already in a very highly sensitive state with a dynamic inflammatory process going on as the breast tries to restructure itself from being pregnant to trying to get back to its pre-pregnancy state. And then if you do have a abnormal cell, introduction of phthalates can increase that migratory ability for promotion and progression. And the same thing with parabens. Parabens are to increase the shelf life. If you've ever tried to make your own products, you realize that making your own products, they get moldy and stinky after a while. And that's because you're not putting these preservatives to prolong the shelf life. Now, all products are used quite varied. The Taking Stock study examined, what are the products that women of color use, or really with diverse individuals, and how frequently do they use them? And so they were looking at sociocultural factors as well as racial discrimination to determine the influence of product use, because that may lead to exposure and inequities. And they surveyed women in California, and these were gender inclusive. And as you see here, it's a very diverse group as displayed in this compact mirror. Now, what it showed us is that for 28 of the 54 products, nearly half, are used variably across race ethnicity. So there are products that we all use very equitably, but there are some products that are used more in other populations. Black women report a higher use of hair products as well as more menstrual intimate products. Hispanic and Latinx and Asian women actually report using cosmetics more than Black and white women. Overall, 70% of women who actually took the survey preferred scented versions of products. And products may say fragrance. That's just a code word for phthalates or a mixture of ingredients that are not even disclosed on the label. And this means that these products that we are more apt to select because of how they smell contain chemicals that are unregulated and undisclosed. So when we're thinking about beauty products, as I showed, it's more likely that Black women are using a number of hair products. What was done biologically was to assess the beauty products that are marketed to women of color to really understand what is the toxic chemical composition. Because we can say everything about these products and that they're used more in abundance by women of color, by Black women, but are they really harmful? And so Silent Spring Institute in Massachusetts screened 66 chemicals across 18 hair products and 6 categories that are predominantly used by women of color. This is perms and relaxers, hot oil treatments, anti-frizz, and root stimulators. And on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is the chemicals and the number of times that chemical showed up in the product. The darker the heat map, the more highly concentrated that chemical is. And then on the top bar, you're seeing how many chemicals were in one singular product. What I think is really important about this is that even in what we consider a safe product, and it's called no-lie relaxers, and no-lie relaxers are given to young Black girls in order to straighten their hair, make the hair more manageable. But even in what we provide our children, there was 4 endocrine disruptor chemicals that are prohibited by the European Union Cosmetic Directive. And that's because the European Union Cosmetic Directive has much stricter guidelines in what can go on a product. And they take a least harm approach, meaning that if there is some indication of harm, then it will go on the list versus a causative approach, which the US takes. The next thing that they also noted is that many of the chemicals that they detected in the products weren't even on the ingredient label. So let's kind of like summarize some of the big ticket items that we're seeing when it comes to the common use of products like perms and relaxers and hair dyes. 1, straightener use. This is perms and relaxers used in white women as well as Black women. Hair dye use. Black women and white women are associated with increased breast cancer risk. However, the prevalence of use of perms and relaxers is higher in Black women, and the risk is greater for Black women. We also know that not just the breast cancer itself, the risk of it, but also the tumor characteristics also vary by these products. So perms and relaxers and hair dyes based off of the application. And so when we say application is you can self-apply these things, or you can go to the salon, or you can do both. And what we found is that the combination application of permanent hair dyes and relaxers was associated with poor tumor characteristics. That means a larger tumor size, poor grade. So it's not that these products are just impacting someone's risk of developing breast cancer, it's also making that breast cancer that they develop more aggressive. Now, it's not just breast cancer. Frequent use of hair straighteners and relaxers has been associated with ovarian cancer. And it's not just women. Personal hair dyes have been associated with increased risk of prostate cancer. So with all of this, why do we have to keep studying it? We need to do something. None of this data did I ever say that personal care products cause an outcome. Never did I say that these products cause uterine fibroids, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer. But the preponderance of the evidence suggests that these personal care products, these hair care products, are associated with very well-known hormonal causing diseases. And some of these hormonal diseases have a higher prevalence among women of color, like uterine fibroids. So the amount of data suggests that we should be acting. We should be taking action to reduce the risk and the harm of these products. And that comes to the framework that we should use when thinking about how to act. Ami Zoda coined the environmental injustice of beauty as a conceptual framework. She is an associate professor in environmental health sciences at Columbia University. And the framework links the intersectional systems of oppression, like racism, sexism, genderism, to racialized beauty practices, which means that you will have an unequal chemical exposure, which means that you will also have more adverse outcomes. And so that is just saying that if racialized beauty practices are to have bone straight hair or more acceptable hairstyles in the workplace, then you are going to expose yourself unequitably to different products that then will have an overburden of biological concentrations that can lead to adverse health outcomes. So how do we get around this? Like, what do we do as a society to address the environmental injustice of beauty? So from a research standpoint, I developed a pilot study along with many colleagues that we call Let's Roar. And it stands for Let's Reclaim Our Ancestral Roots. And it's an educational intervention for pregnant women of color to understand what are endocrine disrupting chemicals, where are they found, specifically focusing on hair products, and how do they impact adverse health outcomes, not just for themselves, but also for the baby. And in this is a mixed method study design that used qualitative analyses to gather participant feedback on how they choose their personal care product, and also quantitative assessments of self-reported behavioral change over time, as well as, because I'm a molecular epidemiologist, we collected urinary measures in order to measure the internal dose of phthalate metabolites over time. What's really important, though, about this study is that this study was not done with an institutional mind frame. It was done with a community mind frame, such as that whenever I go out into the community and I talked about this topic and I said, yes, earlier use of hair products, especially hair oil, is associated with an earlier age at menses for young girls. And we know that that's a risk factor for breast cancer. I talk about the association with breast cancer, talk about the association with fibroids. The community would always come up and ask, then what do I do? Why does it exist? What can be done? And so in partnership with We Act for Environmental Justice, which is a Harlem-based organization, and Young Survival Coalition, who's a health advocate and two-time cancer survivor, and some other institutions, we developed this study design together. It was based in Washington Heights, which is pretty much, they call the Little Dominican Republic. And so we made sure that the educational intervention was bilingual. And the development of the materials was led by an MPH student at the time, Felice Sway. And we created an 8-minute educational video, and then also had engagement via Zoom to emphasize what was seen in the video, but also to have dialogue. While funded pre-pandemic, the pandemic happened. So everything became virtual. And it was a very complicated study design for pregnant women of color in their third trimester. And so this is just to kind of showcase some of the results that we had. You know, I am not a social media person, but I also feel that when you're doing this type of intervention work, you do want to combine multidisciplinary individuals at different phases of their education, also a diverse team. One thing I want to point out here is that it's important to note that just because you're studying women of color doesn't mean that you only work within that isolated or siloed view. You need to incorporate everyone from all walks of life to give them the training, also to give them the experience of understanding what is equity, what is inclusivity. And so we had our undergraduate students who were working on social media. Quantitative methods was worked on by a master's student, Xinying Wang. And what I want to point out, the pilot recruited 46 women, of which majority were foreign born. And then also for race ethnicity, it was highly diverse, where we see that we have Black Hispanic, White Hispanic, Greek Hispanic, Native American Hispanic. And then also among Black women, some of them identified across different races as well. We also did some qualitative assessments led by Christelle Villefranc, who's a doctoral student, to understand the journey that a woman goes through from young age to pregnancy in the agency of her hair products use. Now, that's research, but you also can have personal agency. So we provided them with the different apps that you can use to scan not just your personal care products, but also your cleaning products. Clearia was something that could only be used via the computer if you're buying products from Amazon or from Amazon or Walmart. But now you can actually has an app where you can scan and it'll tell you what alerts are ingredients are in that product. And there's also advocacy. So Breast Cancer Prevention Partners has a campaign for safe cosmetics, and it's mainly to make beauty and personal care products safer for all. It is $100 billion industry. But what is so impressive to me is that Black women have the highest amount of buying power. We are 9 times more purchases of hair care products than anybody. And so what they did is they made the campaign for safe cosmetics for all, realized an inequity as it relates to Black women, and created the Black Beauty Project, of which I'm an advisor. And so to do this with the campaign for safe cosmetic, they created a non-toxic brand list. But they did this specifically for Black-owned beauty brands that are primarily marketed to Black women who had ingredients disclosed. So with that criteria, there was 283 eligible brands. And from that, only 78 actually passed the non-toxic test. They then took those 78 and put it into a beauty database with all of the products of that brand being searchable. So if you were looking to support a Black-owned company, if you're looking to change your product out for a safer brand, you can search this database and say, I'm looking for a different sunscreen. I'm looking for a different shampoo. And it'll kick out some different suggestions for you and link you to the product as well. And you know that they've screened it because they've gone through all of the ingredients within that product. And they also provide for the public facing. If you find a particular chemical, many people are like, well, why is it not safe? Like, I have what benzophenone, that means nothing to me. Well, what they've done is said, okay, it does mean nothing to you, but it could mean something in relationship to health. And so they also do very good visuals in showing you what that chemical is associated with in the literature. And they also provide an annotated bibliography for all of their stuff. There's legal action. Now there's lawsuits. I mean, if you say hair relaxer lawsuits, you get on this right-hand side a number of different firms who are looking for your case. And this is a case against hair relaxers and perms and straighteners saying that they cause their uterine cancer or other health conditions. And so they're pretty much suing the hair relaxer companies. Now, there's also policy. There's the Crown Act, which was created by Dove and the Crown Coalition in 2019 to recognize that many women of color are discriminated in the workplace for the types of hairstyle they use. I remember working in graduate school, which I wasn't supposed to, but I did. And I was working with someone who was a track star. And so she was working to, get more money. She's in college, and she cornrowed her hair because track stars have practice all year round and it's very hard to maintain your hair. And she wanted to look neat. So she got fired because, well, how about this? They stopped giving her hours. So eventually she left the job because she cornrowed her hair. And our managers told her, headquarters is saying that they do not want to see this hairstyle. It's inappropriate for the workplace. You need to either change it up or I'm going to have to reduce your hours. Of course, she didn't do anything. She's in college. She's a track star. She got a new job, but that should never happen. And so race-based hairstyling and being excluded has been a very common thing. And so the Crown Act is to allow for different hair textures in the workplace and public schools to be allowable and illegal to discriminate against. There's also the federal Safer Beauty Bill package. As I said, many of these ingredients are not disclosed on the label, especially if it's a fragrance or a flavor, because industry can say it's proprietary knowledge. And so there's been bills to have the disclosure. There's also cosmetic safety precautions for actual workers. We've definitely seen this enacted in nail salons, but we want to expand this to make sure it's available for other salons as well. And also many of the salon workers, when they buy vats of products, they actually don't have ingredients on the vat product. And so also making sure that there's supply chain transparency. And after 80 years, over 80 years, we now have the Federal Cosmetic Safety Policy Reform, MOCRA. And it's pretty much the biggest change we've seen as it relates to federal policies and making our products safer. But overall, it's going to take action in a collaborative way, not just from our government, but personally, as well as public advocacy and research to make sure that we translate what we're seeing in the labs, what we're seeing in vitro, what we're seeing ex vivo, what we're seeing in populations actually reduces these chronic conditions. And with that, I want to thank my Let's Roar team, which was very highly disciplinary and across multiple training levels, and acknowledge my funding from NIH Center for Environmental Health. And also we dealt with a lot of WBE and MBEs to just support the industry for this project. Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing
Okay.
and wonderful.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome. You're
Yes.
welcome.
So we're opening it up for questions? Yes. Okay. And then I'll run around. So
You have to talk like you're talking into an ice cream cone.
Yes, that is what our IT person said. Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm coming. So
I can also just talk loud.
No, people can't
Oh,
hear you.
okay.
I know, I wish, right?
And can you have a microphone in front of you, that little training thing? Push on it and it turns screen.
Just hold it.
Okay.
And speak.
Is that working?
Hold it and ask.
I'm holding it. Is that working?
Speak up.
Okay, so a lot of products are now advertising, phthalate free, paraben free, sulfate free. Are they required to, like, if they put that on the front, like as an advertising thing, does that necessarily mean that that's true, or do you still have to read the ingredient list?
No, it does mean it's true. And that's because industry goes by what consumers want to see. So there's greenwashing of everything right now where you'll see paraben-free, phthalate-free, et cetera. But there's also replacement chemicals for many of these things that kind of, they say, well, you know the harm as it relates to phthalates, but you don't necessarily know the long-term harm for those replacement chemicals. So even if something says phthalate-free, paraben-free, there may be other chemicals in there that are endocrine disruptor chemicals.
Okay, so would you recommend then just scanning everything with like EWG or something like that?
Yeah, so I actually do recommend scanning. And I also say that when I talk to people, like, it's a big change, especially for your hair. Like people use products because they work, right? So what I say is go with the product that you use on a regular basis, because while like some of these products, they're not like forever chemicals like PFAS. Like phthalates metabolize very quickly, and within a day, if you don't use it, they metabolize and you secrete them out. But the problem is that our personal care routine, it's not like we say like, oh, I'm gonna wash my face today, but I'm not gonna wash my face tomorrow. Like we pretty much keep with such a steady routine that it's a cumulative chronic exposure. And so I would say whatever product you're really using on a regular basis that you cannot live without, scan it and find a safer alternative. Like that, and then pick another product, scan it, find a safer alternative. It's gonna be a lot to just kind of like rid everything. But I think what is important is what are you using regularly? And also for your children, you know, oftentimes we just say like, oh, I'm using this, I'll use it on my kids. Or I got all of this Johnson & Johnson that I'm going to use for my baby. Like really be more mindful, because those are very critical time windows.
We got a question from the Zoom audience. So what stamp of safety do you look for on face and hair products? And she said, I'll be throwing away my makeup tonight.
So what I really do is I use Clearia, and I actually like look at the product that I want to purchase and see if anything pops up as adverse. And I also have been using the Black Beauty Project. So I recently changed out my night cream, and I used that search engine and I found the product that I wanted to use. And for me, I'm not going to memorize every single chemical. And also, to be honest, that's not my job. And it really should be that whatever I buy is safe. But I am going to use the tools that advocates have put in place to make a more informed decision. And so what I usually look for is whether like Detox Me, EWG, Clearia. But I will say the caveat is if you are a person of color, your product that you scan may not be in the database. More likely it won't, because there's an inequity in how we are surveying these products. It's not really being surveyed for people of color. And so that's also why I use the Black Beauty Project to find products.
Great. I'm going to go with a question back here. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Yes.
Okay, I'm Ainhoa Gomez. I'm a pharmacoepidemiologist, and what I have kind of difficult understanding, because what I do is assessing drug exposure and then trying also to associate the risk of exposure, fetus exposure. So how do you assess the exposure of the women to these products? Because sometimes you may have that one, but then the next year you change, someone tells you. So how can you get to like all those things, see the amount, the cumulative amount that you were talking about? How, I mean, for me, from a methodological point of view, it's kind of hard how to assess that exposure.
Right. Yes. So the question is, you know, from a pharmacological point of view, when you're assessing for the effect, how are you assessing like internal dosage? How are you actually measuring that this dosage is really important to this particular outcome? And so what I will say is like, it's in 3 parts. There's in vivo assays, in vitro assays. So looking at how these chemicals actually impact the cellular proliferation, development of a cell. Then you can move into in vivo. And so they use different models, primarily rat and mouse models, to see, does it change for breast cancer? Does it change the mammary gland, the fat pads, and looking to see if there's differences in the terminal ductal lobular units, especially when we're looking at pubertal development, or if we're looking at changes between pregnancy to postpartum. And so those are the lab-based techniques. Now, on a population level, you can do, for example, what I was doing in the sense of that we know that these products have an associated harm. And so we measure the urinary metabolome. So we do targeted measurements. But what you're asking is from a population level, how do we even know? Well, the thing is that we have to rely on self-report. And yes, you can consider that there may be a recall bias, but certain things you recall very vividly. And I would say that I don't know any Black woman who doesn't know if they got a perm. Yeah, it's kind of like, you say like, oh, when people report on a pregnancy, it is retrospective. Well, I'm sure they didn't forget that they were pregnant. And I think the perm is such an experience that you can report on ever having one. But then the question becomes like the frequency. And that can vary. But the idea is that if you can get from a population level reliable measures, just like with smoking, like we don't go around actually measuring nicotine levels, right? We really have like a standardized measure for smoking based off of packs per day. And so that's what we're trying to get in the personal care product space. We're asking, for example, when we asked about salon use versus at home use, it's because we're thinking that the application may be different and you may be exposing yourself through not just through your scalp, but also dermal touch, as well as inhalation and et cetera. You may be actually trying to touch up. So you may be doing it more frequently because you're trying to do a touch up in between a salon visit. We don't really know. But the fact of the matter is we haven't really asked because it hasn't been an issue for the socially advantaged population. And so we're now really just asking this question, but it is being asked, but interventions still need to happen because the burden of outcomes that we're seeing from a hormonal point of view is not dismissed.
Okay, I think I'm going to take just this last question because Nikki really needs to ask it. And then we're going to call it and we'll thank Dr. McDonald. But yes, Nikki.
So cost of this billion-dollar industry and to purchase products that don't contain toxins is more than what the cost is to purchase Johnson & Johnson. Yeah, so how do we get through that, around that, come to it and make it affordable?
Yeah, so what is incredible is 2 points. One is that, yes, it is it's very expensive. And when we did our intervention, we provided things at different price points. But we also asked them, what are the things that you consider when buying a product? And overwhelmingly, cost was not it, because women will pay for beauty. And they will pay for the product that works. I'm talking about, these were women that were being recruited from the ambulatory care network. So they were, high income status, but they were Instagram influencers said, this works for dandruff, so I buy this. This smells so good, so I buy this. And they were using products that worked, made them feel beautiful. And the fact that we are seeing that hair products are such a high volume from Black women, in my opinion, based on beauty standards, price is not going to be as high of a factor as we think. And I do think that the more we push for green chemistry, affordable green chemistry, prices will come down. But right now, people don't know, so people aren't even buying, right? So I feel that that's another thing. Like perms and relaxers, there's no green perm and relaxer. People are going to buy perms and relaxers. There's no need to create if there's no market for the creation, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.